Why Stephen King is not a horror writer. You might be surprised to hear this. You might be thinking, yes, he is. Stephen King writes horror novels. In fact, Stephen King does not write horror. Why do I say this? Well, I'm going to be answering that question and more, and we're starting right now. Whenever an amateur writer wants to write a horror novel, the first thing they want to do is write like Stephen King. So they fill their book with monsters, scary beings that come after innocent people, and then they want that book published. But unfortunately, even if it does get published, it doesn't sell. And it leaves the writer wondering, what happened? I wrote my book just like Stephen King. I filled it with monsters and scary things, but it didn't sell. The fact is, Stephen King does not write about monsters. He writes about the people who are dealing with the monsters. And there is a big difference between the two. When you write a book about monsters, the characters who have to battle those monsters end up becoming secondary. You end up not caring about them. They're two-dimensional. You could take them right out of the novel and no one would notice or care. A lot of amateur writers focus so much on the actual monster itself. And the fact is, if you write too much about a monster, you stop it from being scary. The less we know about a monster, the more scary it is. If we start giving a monster a backstory, a face, a name, a personality, eventually we're not scared of it. But Stephen King does something different. If you ever look at his book called Cujo, about a rabid Saint Bernard who attacks a mother and a son trapped in a car on a farm, you will notice that the rabid dog itself is not really too much in the novel. It's mentioned here or there. But the biggest selling point are the characters, the mother and her son. We spend a long time getting to know these characters, and that is important because a lot of amateur horror writers focus so much on the monster that the reader cannot connect with the antagonist. If you read any novel, be it horror, drama, romance, we connect with the protagonist. We connect with everyday people who have to go through everyday problems, just like the rest of us. In the novel Cujo, the mother was dealing with a failing marriage. She was dealing with a husband who wasn't there for her. And we got to know her, and this was important because the more we got to know her, the more we cared about her. To a point when the dog did start attacking the car, we were truly worried about this mother and her son. How is she going to be safe? How is she going to get out of this problem? Because she was trapped on a farm and nobody knew she was there. And this massive Saint Bernard was circling the car. An average horror writer would focus tremendously on the dog itself and not caring about the people. But Stephen King, if you read any of his novels, he does the complete opposite. He spends a tremendous amount of time focusing on the characters, making us care for them. And we see this in a short story that he wrote called The Mist. Eventually it was made into a movie. In The Mist, it was about a father and a son trapped inside of a grocery store with a group of strangers when a gray mist moves in, covering the entire town. And if anybody goes outside, they instantly get killed by something. We don't know what it is, but we know there is something within the mist that kills anybody who goes outside. And the problem then becomes about Stephen King did not write about the monsters. The problem was, how do these people work together in order to solve this mystery about what is outside? Stephen King barely described what was outside. And that actually was better because it left it to the reader's imagination about what was outside. The characters on the inside of the grocery store actually start turning on each other. And this actually created for more drama, more suspense. Because suspense is all about wanting to know what's going to happen next. And that can apply to horror, drama, comedy. It doesn't matter what you write. As long as there is suspense, there is a feeling that the story is moving forward. And this is what makes somebody want to turn the page. Stephen King spent a long time letting us get to know the characters before they went to the grocery store and before the mist moved in. So when the mist did move in and the characters in the grocery store started fighting with each other, we were actually nervous for this father and his son. What was going to happen to them? Were they going to be safe? But Stephen King does not create superheroes dealing with monsters. He makes regular everyday people who we can relate to. People who are just like us, who have everyday middle class problems, who all of a sudden you now have to face a monster. Look at Misery. Here was a book about an author who is driving home after finishing writing a novel, and he gets into a car accident in a snowstorm, only to find himself trapped inside of a cottage with an obsessed fan who would not let him leave. Now all of a sudden, we care about this character because we spent a long time getting to know him. So now we worry, how is this regular everyday guy going to deal with this obsessed fan who has him trapped in his cottage? Whereas amateur writers focus tremendously on the villain. They focus on the gore and the horror. But Stephen King focuses on character. And we see this in novels like The Body, which was made into the movie Stand By Me, and The Shawshank Redemption, which was also made into a movie, which a lot of people are now saying is the greatest movie ever made. And the vast majority of the dialogue in the Shawshank Redemption movie came straight from his novel. It proves that Stephen King can write about people. He can write about people in jail and how they have to fight on a daily basis just to keep their sanity and their hope within jail. Stand By Me was about a group of kids living in the 1950s. There was no monsters or demons, but yet a lot of people loved watching the movie. And the majority of all of the movie comes straight from his book, proving that Stephen King focuses on characters, not the monsters. But if you ask anybody, what do you know about Stephen King? They say, well, he writes about monsters. But the truth is, there are a lot of writers out there who write about monsters, but their books don't sell like he does. His books have sold over 100 million. But why is this? It's because he cares about the characters that makes us care about the characters. Stephen King has this unique way of pulling you into the novel. When you read a Stephen King novel, you're not reading about someone else. He has this way of making you feel as though you're inside the mind of the protagonist. When you read Cujo, you feel as though it is you who is trapped within the car. You wonder how you are going to survive. How are you going to deal with this rabid dog? When you read somebody else's novel, you're reading about someone else who is dealing with the problem, as though there is a gap between you and the book. But when you read a Stephen King novel, you feel as though you have been pulled inside the novel, as though the novel is happening around you. If you want to be a great writer, write about the characters and make us care about the characters, but pull the reader into the story as though they are the protagonist dealing with the monster. Whenever there's movies made based on Stephen King novels, the majority of the time, the director will take the personalities out of the protagonist, and the focus then becomes on the monster itself, which leads to a bad movie, a movie in which the majority of people watching cannot care about or connect with, because we don't connect with monsters. But Stephen King will write about a monster, but the focus is on the characters dealing with the monsters. And whenever a movie is made based on his books, the characters become two-dimensional. They become boring. The focus is too much on the monster, which is what a lot of amateur writers do. Now we're dealing with a movie in which the characters now become boring and the monster is the focal point. And this is why people always say that Stephen King novels are better than the movie, because his novels focuses on the characters, just like how you as a writer need to focus on character, regardless if it's a comedy, romance, drama, but especially in horror novels. Because when it comes to horror, people think all you have to do is write about some big bad monster and have fake two-dimensional characters, but the book will be great because you focused on the monster. But the truth is, if you look at Stephen King, he does the complete opposite. Read any Stephen King novel and count the number of pages in which he focuses on the actual demons or the villains. Those pages are very few. If you look at Salem's Lot, the vampires are mentioned very briefly, but there is a tremendous focus on the characters, just like in his novel The Stand, about the majority of the world's population being dead and only a few people surviving, and how they have to work together at dealing with the end of the world. The entire book is over 1,000 pages, but it's all about character. If your average amateur writer would write about a haunted hotel, like Stephen King did in The Shining, they would focus on the hotel itself, and the characters would be weak and boring. But Stephen King put all of the focus on the characters themselves within the hotel. So by the time you get to the ending, you're turning the pages quickly because you want to know how this is going to end, because you're so emotionally invested in the characters to a point where you think these people are real, that you could close your book, walk outside, and actually see these people in real life. That is how complex his characters are. Even when he writes a short story, because he has written many books, like Skeleton Crew and Night Shift, which is made up of short stories. But even if a story is 5 or 10 pages long, we find ourselves caring about the protagonist and worrying about the villain. But the focus is always on the characters. And a great example is the Shawshank Redemption. That's something you should try reading. And you would be amazed how there really is no monster, but you do care about the characters. That is Stephen King's greatest quality. He focuses on making real people dealing with monsters, and he barely mentions the monsters. Take a look at the book that you're writing right now. Can you take the bad guy, can you take the antagonist out and still have an enjoyable novel? Chances are, if you're starting out, your main focus is on the bad guy. But you should be able to take your bad guy out and still have a powerful, moving story. You should be able to take your protagonist out and put them into another novel and know how they're going to act and react to whatever problem there is because of how real and complex you've made them in your mind. You know your protagonist. You should be able to take your antagonist out and still have a successful story to tell about the protagonist, their lives, and who they are. That is something that Stephen King does. If you enjoyed watching this video, be sure to check out my website, where I have a tremendous amount of information that I can help you become the greatest writer you can be. I'm going to leave a link down in the description below to my website, and you can visit it right now. And if you enjoyed watching this video, be sure to check out my next video on the opening line of your novel and why you have to make it count. In fact, I'm going to leave a link to that video right here, and you can click on it and start watching right now.